In the spring of 1990, the $1.5 billion Hubble Space Telescope was loaded into Space Shuttle Discovery's payload bay, and on April 24th was sent aloft to be deployed to Earth orbit on STS-31.
Capcom, we have a go for release. Discovery, go for Hubble release.
Okay, we have a go for release.
As envisioned, Hubble would return never-before-seen images detailing our universe as it was millions upon millions of years before. Soon it would become clear that Hubble pictures were not.
Several days later, if not a couple of weeks, we found out, after we were back on Earth, that it had a problem with its vision. And most of us were just devastated, you know, that here we had this marvelous instrument that we had put on orbit and it was going to be useless. It turned out that it wasn't useless at all, because even as with its flaw, it was still a much better telescope than anything that we had, you know, on Earth.
A shuttle mission dedicated to the telescope's repair was planned. In essence, Hubble's nearsightedness would be corrected with a new pair of glasses.
Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour on an ambitious mission to service the Hubble Space Telescope.
We finally flew STS-61, which was the first Hubble servicing mission. Absolutely incredible mission.
Clearly we have a dynamic situation.
You cannot take the 84-inch mirror out of the telescope. It's part of structure, too big, it's there. So by putting in one box called CoStar, we're able to correct the aberrated light for 5 other instruments.
Of all the space shuttle missions we've flown, it was without a doubt the most ambitious flight, but the one that I think demonstrated NASA's can-do attitude, its technological skill, its technical capability, and the spirit of its people.
2 teams of astronauts made a record 5 back-to-back spacewalks to refurbish Hubble and realize her potential to awe and astound. While Hubble servicing missions were very important, the true gift of a maneuverable shuttle was soon realized in a very different rescue mission.
Booster ignition and liftoff of the maiden voyage of Endeavour on a satellite rescue mission.
Months earlier, in May of 1992, the 7 astronauts of STS-49 overcame initial setbacks to pluck the $180 million Intelsat-6 communication satellite from an unusable orbit.
It was going to be a very simple rendezvous, you know, get close, bring the satellite down close and grapple it with the remote manipulator system. Everything that could go wrong went wrong.
We got up there to capture it. The bar, we tapped the satellite with the bar, and the satellite started moving out of control.
Get me in, pitch me over. Into the arm, watch the end of the arm.
That's the singularity again.
You're gonna have to get out of there.
It can be very difficult catching something like a tumbling satellite in space. The slightest touch or mistouch by the astronaut with the equipment, and you can send that satellite tumbling.
Here, make sure that when you want me to yaw right, you say yaw right. Okay. Any other time right is just right. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Better move. We're moving.
And so it was very touch and go on that mission, actually.
Commander Dan Brandenstein and pilot Kevin Chilton are preparing for the upcoming terminal initiate burn.
After several days of failed attempts with Endeavour's remote arm, Commander Dan Brandenstein literally tries a new approach.
Yeah, real easy, guys, real easy. Don't bring us any closer, Dan. Okay, I'm stopping it.
At Endeavour's helm, Brandenstein delicately maneuvers the orbiter up to the 4.5-ton Intelsat-6.
The satellite is rolling out of control in 3 different axes at once, and you could actually fly the shuttle and fly this maneuver around and keep it aligned with it.
It's got to be the neutral point right here.
3 people grabbed 18,000 pounds.
Aware that any miscue could endanger not only the satellite but also the ride home, spacewalkers Pierre Thuot, Tom Akers, and Rick Heeb reach out and secure the satellite by hand.
Okay, wait. Let's do it. Got it. Easy. Give it some time. Give it time. All got a good grip? Yes, sir. Houston, I think we got a satellite.
Yeah, nice job, guys.
Intelsat 6 is released from the cargo bay with a new mini-rocket motor for a gentle push to its proper orbit, where it remains today, fully functional. And as the shuttle program matured, so it seemed did relationships between the world's spacefaring nations. On STS-47, the 50th Space Shuttle mission saw the orbiter Endeavour back in space on September 12, 1992. The mission was a cooperative space lab venture between Japan and the United States that brought the first Japanese astronaut into orbit as a member of the 7-person shuttle crew.
The Space Shuttle has launched people from different nations around this world that used to feel they could never, ever work together. And it has ushered us from the Cold War to this really cooperative space program that we have with our international partners, including the former Soviet Union.
Regardless of what language you speak and love space, and that's pretty cool. We have a lot in common with engineers and scientists around the world, and that's kind of fun to work in a program like this.
On February 3, 1995, Eileen Collins, the first woman to pilot a shuttle, was at the helm as Discovery gave the U.S. its first up-close look at the Mir space station. Collins flew the shuttle through a series of intricate maneuvers, approaching within 37 feet of the Russian spacecraft, and later performing a fly-around by hand.
And liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission that will herald a new day of international cooperation in space.
4 months later, on June 27, 1995, Shuttle Atlantis would lift off from the Kennedy Space Center to begin STS-71, the U.S. space program's 100th human space mission. It would take 2 more days before Atlantis caught up with and performed the first shuttle docking with the Mir space station.
Houston, Atlantis, we have captured.
Orbiting 220 miles above the Earth, a most unique and historic celebration took place. As the Mir space station welcomed its first American guests, cosmonauts and astronauts together broke figurative bread, tortillas and fruit to be exact, in a renewed spirit of cooperation. Together, Shuttle and Mir formed the largest flying spacecraft the world had yet to see. It tipped the scales at 250 metric tons, more than 500,000 pounds. Between 1994 and 98, the Shuttle Mir program would involve 11 shuttle missions, including in 1996 STS-76, which began a continuous U.S. presence aboard the Russian space station with a visit by Atlantis. Barely fluent in Russian, astronaut Shannon Lucid, a biochemist, embarked upon a mission that would dramatically enhance our understanding of life in space. When she finally landed at Edwards Air Force Base on Shuttle Atlantis, she held the female space endurance record for spending 188 days in orbit. A hero's welcome was in store.
I'm here to say welcome home to Shannon Lucid.
By the time Shuttle Mir ended with STS-91, 7 American astronauts had completed extended stays aboard the Russian space station.
Tatiana Mativa, who I became very good friends with, and I remember us sitting in Red Square having dinner together with a full moon, and remembering when I was a child all those parades, those May Day parades with the tanks going by, and here we were sitting there having a nice dinner under the full moon and with a lot of friendship. So it just goes to show how space can unite people, and that's I think one of the biggest benefits.
8 cosmonauts had flown to Mir on the U.S. shuttle, and NASA astronaut Norm Thagard had become the first American to fly there or anywhere aboard a Soyuz spacecraft. In 2001, 15 years after its commissioning, Mir would be abandoned to break up and burn in Earth's atmosphere. By then, the process of building upon Mir's legacy of international cooperation in space had already begun. Whereas STS-61 had helped establish the Hubble Space Telescope as an icon of American ingenuity, STS-95 would update the hero's credentials of one John Glenn. On October 29, 1998, almost 37 years after becoming the first American to orbit the Earth as an original Mercury 7 astronaut, Glenn, now a 77-year-old former U.S. Senator, made his return to space. In contrast to his first flight, a 3-orbit, 4.5-hour foray inside the snug Friendship 7 capsule,
Liftoff of Discovery with a crew of 6 astronaut heroes and 1 American legend.
STS-95 would take 8 days and circle the Earth 134 times.
My main reason for being on that shuttle flight was to do research on aging. I was 77, we went up, and you know, NASA has charted some 52 different changes that occur in the human body when you go into space for a period of time. And several of those are very similar to what happens to the natural process of aging right here on Earth. Body's immune system changes. You get less resistant to disease and infection. Body's ability to absorb protein back into the muscles changes for the young people up there and for elderly here on Earth. The objective was to take those things that are the same and see if we couldn't find any differences between my experience up there and the younger people I would fly with the idea of finding in the human body what turns these different systems on and off. If we could do that, we might be able to make it possible for people to stay in space longer without harmful effects, and maybe cut out some of the frailties of old age right here on Earth. I really was happy to be assigned to that flight.
In an interesting twist of fate, astronaut Glenn not only inspired both the young and old around the globe, but also a fresh political science and economics graduate, Lori Garver, the 18th Deputy Administrator of NASA.
Having the ability at NASA to fly him again in space after his first flight was something we, I think, gave the nation, and it really helped explain what we were doing on the space shuttle. John Glenn was very, very focused on doing those experiments for both, I think, the older generation, but he was also an inspiration to people growing up.
Discovery carried a variety of payloads and research experiments. Arguably, the one most valuable was Glenn himself. Not only did he provide first-time data on what spaceflight might do to the body of a septuagenarian, Glenn also renewed the interest of the nation and the world in America's Space Shuttle Program. While the program had and continued to successfully deploy and service science probes and satellites, as well as conduct on-orbit research, the Space Shuttle undertook a new, long-range task, perfectly suited to her specialized capabilities.
You've got a spacecraft that can carry at least 7 people into orbit, and with those 7 people, you can do a huge amount of work. One mission, you can do multiple EVAs, you've got multiple crew members, you've got a huge payload, just all kinds of capabilities to be able to construct and build bigger things in orbit.
Less than 2 weeks after Glenn's return to Earth, a Russian Proton rocket departs the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, carrying the Zarya module, the first component of the new International Space Station.
Liftoff of the Proton rocket and the Zarya control module. The International Space Station is underway.
2 weeks after that, Space Shuttle Endeavour follows up with delivery of America's Unity module, the second piece of this largest space station puzzle ever to be constructed.
Houston Endeavour, we have capture of Zarya.
Not until July 2000 will the Russian Zvezda module be added, finally allowing for 2 Russian cosmonauts and their American Expedition 1 commander, Bill Shepard, to journey aboard a Soyuz spacecraft to the International Space Station and begin humankind's continuous extraterrestrial presence.
Across the world, people are very, very interested in and delighted by the International Space Station and the science that has taken place there.
Since only an orbiter's payload bay could hold the station's largest components, the multi-year, multi-mission building, outfitting, and servicing of the ISS with cargo and crew would become primarily a job for the shuttle. Amid these dynamic station building missions, one seemingly simple and relatively uncomplicated flight would prove problematic and threaten the very future of America's human spaceflight program. Since 1988, the Space Shuttle had completed 15 years of successful missions. Each was unique, each had its own specific goals and tasks, and each had its own dedicated crew of astronauts who'd trained exhaustively to meet and carry them out. Yet each of those 87 flights did have two things in common: a safe launch,
liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery,
and a safe landing.
Nose gear touchdown.
From the start, STS-107 seemed to be a mission out of sorts. By the time Columbia was finally ready to fly on January 16, 2003, its planned 16-day mission had been delayed no fewer than 18 times. All those delays had ultimately positioned the STS-107 as a sort of black sheep on the Space Shuttle program's launch schedule. Columbia's crew commander Rick Husband, pilot Willie McCool, and mission specialists Michael Anderson, Kalpna Chawla, Dave Brown, Laurel Clark, and Israeli astronaut Ilan Ramon would not go to the International Space Station. Their flight would require nothing more risky than orbiting the Earth.
Booster ignition and liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia with a multitude of national and international space research experiments.
82 seconds after launch, what was later described as a suitcase-sized chunk of frozen foam insulation breaks off Columbia's external tank and strikes the leading edge of the orbiter's left wing.
Roger, roll, Columbia.
A routine same-day video review of the launch would reveal nothing unusual. However, higher resolution tracking camera film processed overnight and reviewed on flight day 2 by the mission's ascent team showed otherwise.
You saw this little thing float toward the leading edge of the wing and like, it was like a snowball hitting something and then just being pulverized. But when you saw it hit, ooh, we just winced, because we knew, the vehicle's going 500 miles an hour or better. It was inconceivable in hindsight that you could have that kind of impact at the speed that the vehicle was going and assume that there was no damage. And that's what we allowed ourselves to feel comfortable that we were right and we were dead wrong.
Due to limitations in the visual clarity, the exact point of impact and extent of any damage could not be determined. If the foam strike had compromised Columbia's integrity, little, if anything, could be done to repair the orbiter in space. 1 week after launch, Mission Control emails the crew informing them of the debris strike. Save for a relatively minor problem with a leaky refrigeration unit, STS-107 had been without further incident. As scheduled, the order is given on the morning of February 1st for the Columbia crew to begin the landing procedure and come home to Florida. Traveling in excess of 12,000 miles per hour, the orbiter's belly begins to glow red as it descends into Earth's atmosphere.
FYI, I've just lost 4 separate temperature transducers on the left side of the vehicle, hydraulic return temperatures.
As reentry started and as the ground track went across the states, the ground track, of course, changes color. You can tell where the shuttle is over what part of the country it is. Well, that display stopped updating. In other words, that display froze in a certain position. Well, sometimes you have loss of data, you have some problem with the system on the ground where you'll have those kind of outages temporarily. Well, this lasted a bit longer. Then the call went up to the crew. A call went up and no response. Well, I don't know, I just began to feel uneasy.
Columbia, Houston, UHF comm check.
At speeds above Mach 20, the stress becomes too much for the orbiter.
We do not have any valid data at this time.
The suitcase-sized chunk of foam had indeed punched a bowling ball-sized hole in the leading edge of Columbia's left wing. Within seconds, internal temperatures spike, signaling the cascade of structural disintegration. Only 16 minutes from home, Space Shuttle Columbia breaks apart in the skies over East Texas. All 7 crew members are lost.
GC flight. Flight GC, lock the doors. Copy.
And at that moment, I knew we lost him.